Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to our Facebook Live series. I'm so excited to be your moderator for tonight's conversation. We're honored to be joined tonight by Dr. Elise Blasingame, an Osage scholar, a policy expert, and the brilliant mind behind Advance's latest report on Native representation. Tonight's conversation is part of our ongoing work to uplift Native leadership and visibility in all levels of government. We're so grateful for this opportunity to learn more about Dr. Blasingame, as well as this report, whose research and lived experience offer powerful insight into the state of Indigenous policy and political power today. Um, just a little bit of background. My name is Lexi Locklear. She, her, hers pronouns. I'm Lumbee from North Carolina, currently in Raleigh. Before I properly introduce our guest, I just wanted to lay a little bit of a background behind Advance and the work that we do. So Advance Native Political Leadership, or just commonly known as Advance by all of our friends, is the first and only national Native-led organization dedicated to building political power within Native communities. We take a holistic approach to create an ecosystem that focuses on leadership recruitment and support, as well as civic engagement, data and research, and national coordination. This conversation is going to be focused a little bit on the work that we do within our data and research branch. And we have our scholar in resident, Elise, who is going to be discussing that a little bit more in depth. Here at Advance, we believe that when Native people and communities have access to national networks, innovative tools for organizing, strong voter engagement strategies, and pathways to leadership, we strengthen the health and well-being of all of our communities at large. Native political engagement has been deeply limited by historical, legal, and modern barriers, and this is especially true for Native women. Because of these barriers, Native peoples remain drastically underrepresented in government at every level. At Advance, we are committed to creating opportunities for leadership development, community connection, and visibility for Native leaders at all offices. We're working to build power through leadership representation so Native voices are heard at every level of decision making within our country. A little bit about our guest. Elise is an Osage citizen, our scholar in residence here at Advance. In this role, she researches representation and power in Native communities with a special focus on the policy priorities of Native office holders within U.S. government. She is also lending her expertise to help Advance build a new message testing and polling research program. Elise is a policy and research professional with over a decade of experience in public service. Her research is focused on the substantive effects of increased Indigenous representation in American political institutions. She's currently a professor at Emory University. Her research has been published in the American Political Science Review, Political Research Quarterly, Political Science Research and Methods, and the American Journal of Public Health. Elise works on parks and transportation projects for her community in Atlanta, where she lives with her husband and two dogs, Taco Bell and Mochi. Elise, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm truly excited to be a part of this conversation with you and to learn more about your path and experiences, as well as more about this report in general. Before we dive into the heart of tonight's discussion, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, a little bit about what grounds you in your work?
Um, Hi, Lexi. Hi, everybody. It's so lovely to be here this evening. Thank you for having me. I'm also really excited to be here with you and our broader community tonight to talk about the report, which I hope by the end of tonight, we can all agree that it's so much more than just a report. It's really a benchmark for us to see where our progress can take us from here. Um, as you mentioned, I'm Elise Blasingame. I'm a researcher, citizen of Osage Nation. I've been privileged to work as Advanced Scholar in Residence for the past year and a half. And, I work primarily as a political scientist. That's what I have my PhD in. But before that, I worked as a social worker, policy advocate, and for multiple not-for-profits and unions over the past decade. And what I've always been most interested in is process. So there's a lot of content expertise that's needed in the policy world. I'm interested in actually the political process of how we get from A, where we are, to point B, where we want to go in our policy pursuits. And when it comes to protecting sovereignty, we know very well that that's not a straight line to get from A to B. It gets really muddled by the courts, by legislation, by who's representing us in these endeavors, whether they're hired lobbyists or elected officials. We take a few steps in one direction and then we have to pivot. And nobody knows this more than Native people who are serving as elected and appointed leaders in our political system. And I hope that we've done them justice here by raising up their stories. That's really what grounds me as a researcher, is focusing on our wins, focusing on how much we can accomplish despite those barriers and the things that have historically held us back in terms of representation. Um, and just noting those stories and raising those up as we try to encourage other folks to also use their expertise and their lived experience in the policy world. And on that note, I also just want to say that working with Advance has been very grounding. It's really nice to work in community and to be focused on producing something that is for everyone, that is for our communities, that, isn't highly technical or, it has great information, but is really supposed to be a tool for everybody to use. And on that note, I want to shout out Megan Feeney, my co-author and editor for the report, and the entire Advance team for really inspiring the report and making it available for everyone. We don't always get to do that in academia, and it's a joyful moment to produce something for us that I hope will be useful as we try to increase Native representation in the rooms where these policy decisions are being made.
For us and by us, that is something that since I've been in Advance, that's been repeated in every space that we're in, and it's just great to see that continuing to come to fruition. Our latest report, Representing Ourselves, sheds light on representation gaps within the US today. What do you think the numbers really tell us about where we are?
Well, first I should say, I think this is self-evident for everybody on this call with us tonight, but we really wouldn't have a need for an organization like Advance if we already had descriptive representation. And what do I mean by descriptive representation? I mean that we had the same percentage of folks in office as our population demands, right? So if we're roughly 2 to 3% of the population nationally, 2 to 3% of congressional seats would be represented by Native identifying people. But we already know that there's a pretty glaring deficit, even before this report came out, of elected officials in the US system. And that's at all levels for people who identify as Native. And that also means that we have less folks who are potentially working to prioritize policies that promote and protect tribal sovereignty. That being said, the report really focuses on our wins and how, despite our low numbers, many folks mentioned in the report who are often the only Native person, or maybe just one of 2 or 3 in an elected body, still have accomplished a great deal on behalf of tribes. And that's despite party politics and all the other things, and district politics and other constituencies that they have to serve, in addition to thinking about tribal sovereignty in their area or nationally. So in all categories, so that's judicial, executive, legislative, in the American system, and at all levels, local, so that's city, county, state, federal, we need so many more folks to run and be appointed to meet just descriptive parity. And we've made the greatest gains at the state and local levels, which is not very surprising because there's a much lower barrier to entry. It involves less money and resources. You also don't have to you don't have to tie in so much to the party structure at those levels. A lot of those are nonpartisan elections, and people, some people are attracted to that because they don't want to deal with the party politics. So making the shift from being on tribal council to running for county clerk or city council feels like a much more feasible move for many candidates who might be interested in working on change, especially for those who are living on or near reservations and want to make impact locally, or who live near their home communities.
Thank you for that great breakdown. And like you said, it makes sense that the move from tribal offices to low offices seems a little bit more feasible for folks. And I think a little bit of that is just not understanding or not really realizing what it takes, or I don't know, I guess it seems a little bit bigger than you can chew when you think about a US office compared to a local office. Kind of in the same vein, were there any findings in this research that particularly surprised you or moved you? Um, and then were there any that didn't surprise you? Any that you were kind of like, yeah, that seems right?
Yeah, a bit of column A, column B. So, in terms of, there's a lot of things that surprised me, in a way. So, for example, things that moved me, I'll start there. So, really enjoyed obviously reading interviews and stories about the school board members. I don't think we talk enough about, even if we understand it, how influential school boards are, right? This is where our next generation are getting messages about whether or not we respect tribal sovereignty as a state, as a locality, how we teach our history, right? All of these things happen in the schools. And food, mental health, like all of these things are happening in the school system. And so I remember reading a lot of really interesting stories. We had, and I should say, as a caveat, all this data is from 2024 and prior, right? We did our analysis in 2024 and then we published the report in 25. So just as a caveat, we had 96 Native school board members in 2024, which is pretty incredible. And I remember Carol Cadu Blackwood, and she's a member of the Kickapoo and Prairie Band of Potawatomi tribes. And she worked really hard in Kansas to get the Board of Ed to retire Indians as school mascots. This is one of those, issues that comes back and goes away and comes back as like a priority. We've seen it now. Trump has made it a priority yet again, or has at least put it into the mainstream media. So more people are thinking about it as a salient issue. It's always an issue for us, right? It doesn't go away. And so this is a hot button issue states are thinking about and are weighing in on this, and nationally on the professional sports mascot debate. And I know it may seem like this is a symbolic win, but those are real wins for the kids in those school districts. And we know from researchers like Stephanie Freiberg, who's a psychologist, that there's absolutely real, measurable psychological and mental health consequences for kids who have to go to a school where Native people are caricatured in that way. And so it is a big deal to be able to do that at the local level. Um, in terms of things that were surprised, and I mean, the whole report I think is very moving. I'm biased, of course, but I really enjoyed reading. And there's so many stories we couldn't include too, beyond this report. We had to stop at some point. So we know we're missing some stories in here, but I think I was surprised by the fact that the majority of states, 30 something states, even with some of those states that have federally recognized tribes in them or have state recognized tribes, do not have a standing committee or body in the legislature to handle Native affairs. And what do I mean by that? Well, legislatures have standing committees, rules committee, appropriations. They may have a health committee, judiciary, right? These committees that organize their policy work every year. And only some of them, a handful, less than 20, have a standing committee on Indian affairs, right? And so for me, that's a huge signal for how seriously the state legislature is taking Native affairs broadly. Whether or not they have Native electeds or not, it tells us, this is not something that comes up enough for us to prioritize as a committee. And sometimes, even when just having one Native person in the legislature in those states can have a huge impact on agenda setting for that session. And I think we can talk about those later on, what that looks like. The other thing that's probably not shocking, but is one of those things that keeps coming up, and I know Advance is doing work on this. I know other organizations are also doing important work on this, and we shout that out in the report. The stats on the judicial representation are probably the most stark, right? And of course, organizations like NARF, Native American Bar Association, National NALSA, right? All of these groups are doing a lot to try and get our next generation of Native lawyers trained and ready for clerkships, and then, of course, to be potentially appointed as judges. And there's a quote on page 12 that I want to share about that. So the stat is, to date, there have been 11 Native judges to ever have served on a federal bench, and no Native people have ever been nominated to the Supreme Court. To put that in perspective, there are over 800 judges who serve on the federal courts each year. And while these are lifetime appointments, modern presidents each have appointed over 200 judges during their terms, respectively. That says there's plenty of opportunity, and we have plenty of talented lawyers. Um, but there may be systemic barriers to why they're not getting prioritized on that list. It used to be for federal appointments to the judiciary that presidents would use this vetted list from the American Bar Association. Now, recently we've had a native president of the American Bar Association. We've made a lot of strides in that organization, but at the same time, our current president has decided not to use that anymore as a vetting process. President Bush also had some questions about using that list, so it's becoming more politicized, and so there's less of a chance for a centralized vetting process for us to kind of work through to get those judges on the list to be appointed. And in fact, it may even be that, folks who work so hard to get on that ABA list are now put on a list that they're going to say, oh, we're not going to look at this list at all because it's been politicized. So I think the judicial statistics are a hard one to swallow because I just know, we all know how much hard work has gone into getting more Native lawyers trained. And we can feel that, right? We have more representation in the legal field, but it's another barrier to get those judicial appointments.
That does make sense. And like you said, just to highlight, Advance is doing work and working on this issue as well as other organizations. Um, so a little bit more into like strategies and data collection. Um, of what you know, what strategies can be used to improve data collection and accurately track Native representation at all government levels, including appointed roles as well?
Sounds pretty difficult. As you know, we rely heavily on self-identification for folks who say, I'm Native, I'm running, or I'm Native and I'm elected. And it's been really interesting reading through people's bios, press releases, media interviews, campaign websites. These are all the sources we typically use to validate identity. Does this person say they're Native? Do they show up in tribal newspapers? Does their tribe say, yes, you are a member of our tribe and we're tracking what you're doing, right, in the selected body? These are all signals, right, of identity that are external. But there are some cases where they may be in a state where there's no federally recognized tribes, like in like a state in the Southeast, for example, where I'm from, and their Native identity may not be as salient, and so they don't use it in their political materials. So there is a chance that we're undercounting here, right? But I will say that in a lot of cases it is in the bios, but I have to say, our biggest boon to the data process has been partnership with ICT News. They've been tracking Native candidates for many years. They do a great job of updating the list of Native candidates each year at multiple levels. And they've just been an incredible research partner for Advance. So without their foundational work, we would not have the sense of where we stand in representation across institutions. So I have to shout out ICT News and their wonderful team of journalists. In terms of how we go through the data and what would be helpful, I mean, people telling us would be helpful. I would say that most of the time people do mention their tribal affiliation in their bios for state legislatures and members of Congress. Those levels are pretty consistent. Like I said, unless they're in a state where maybe they think it's politically disadvantageous to share their identity for discrimination reasons. But there is a reason our data for state and local electeds gets harder before 1993. So in the report, you'll see that the data for state legislators on the map, there's a map of all the state legislators who have served between 1993 and 2023. And before the advent of the internet as we know it now and social media, we really didn't have a lot of access to personal information or biographical information about these electeds or the candidates. So it's really hard to get that information validated. It's also a lot harder to find the judges because, as many folks know from your elections, when you go to vote for judges, you're like, who is this judge? What have they done? I have no idea how to vote yes or no on this judge, especially if they're nonpartisan and you'd be voting along party lines. there's really little information about them besides what they might put on a campaign website. And even then, many judges are appointed rather than elected, so they might not even have a campaign website to look at. So it can be difficult to find information on how they self-identify or what communities they're part of, as they don't give media interviews very often. And the reason being is they're trying to keep judicial independence, right? They're supposed to be objective, decision makers in our court system. And so they don't engage with the media very often. Um, for city and county officials, it's much harder since their bios are usually quite short and focused more on their district, if they even have a bio on the site at all, especially in more rural or small areas. So unless it's a county where there's a reservation or a large Native community like Tulsa or Phoenix, they may not mention their tribal affiliation at all. So really the best thing folks can do is tell us. Please email us. Let us know if you know of a Native person running for office at any level or being appointed, and then we can reach out to their team to verify. But it really helps when folks share this information with us proactively, because it is hard to search through everything. And we could look at a million sites, and if they don't say their tribal affiliation, we wouldn't know.
That is a great point. If you all are not signed up for our newsletter, please make sure that you sign up for that. We usually get a lot of replies for folks who are looking through that newsletter and saying, "Hey, so and so is running. Did you know this?" So just to know, someone is reading those emails and they go directly to our research team. So we greatly appreciate any submission that is submitted. So, Elise, in your view, and this is a tricky question, but what does true Native representation in government actually look like?
It's a really good question. I don't know that it's possible to answer, but what I will say is, I think like our tribal nations, it's really different based on our region, treaty history, relationship with the county, state, and federal government. Representation may look very different based on these factors. I think I mentioned this earlier. Descriptive representation is one thing, having the actual parity in terms of population percentage, but that's not the same thing as having a breadth of experience and different ideologies, different belief systems from within one tribe, for example. Just because you have representation from one tribe and it's one person certainly doesn't mean that you have representation from that entire tribe, or the diverse opinions within that group. So on one hand, it would be nice to have simply descriptive parity, and I think that is one of our goals, because we do believe that, and we see for the most part that Native folks do prioritize sovereignty focused policy priorities. But we also have to make sure that we're supporting folks who put sovereignty first in their agenda setting, because not all Native folks are going to approach the work the same way or even have similar policy goals. And also people have multiple identities, right? If you are a member of the LGBTQ community, and you're also Native, if your state is at that moment putting forward anti-trans legislation, for example, that may be where your focus gets pulled, and necessarily so, right? And so it really, depending on the policy landscape, we can get activated in different ways and get pulled on different policy directions, even if we also do want to uphold tribal sovereignty for the folks in our district. So generally speaking, I would say, we do see folks, Native folks particularly, tend to introduce policies that increase funding for tribes at the state level. So that's data from state legislatures. So education, roads, water, tribal courts, etc. Or codifying descriptive representation on decision-making boards. Like, for example, if you have a Native commission in your executive branch that's dealing with Indian Gaming Regulation Act compacts, you have to have, X number of representatives from the tribes in the state, things like that. But all of that's going to be tempered by party politics, what's going on in the district or state at that time that might pull focus. So I did not give you a very direct answer to your question, but I think it really depends on at the local level. It's why I think we've been so encouraged to see so many folks running at the local level, because that really is where we see the most wins, like short, like you can do things a lot faster at the local level. And so we see a lot of the policy wins and success stories at those levels and at the state level because it's, like we said, a lower barrier to entry, but also if you're from that community, you know how to work with those folks and you know what's going to feel like um, inclusive representation for your community, you know? And that's going to be different depending on where you're living and which tribal groups you're part of.
Something that you said that I really liked was the thread that ties us all together, or usually ties us all together, is tribal sovereignty. And I can say I see that a lot in the candidates that come through a lot of our programs. Um, how, in your opinion, how can Native officials balance engagement within the conventional electoral systems, while also affirming that tribal sovereignty and self-determination that is so dear and close to our values?
Man, well, first I'll say I'm not the right person to answer this. I'll say what I've observed and learned from speaking with and learning from Native electeds at a point is because they're the ones that have to do this every day, right? Like I said, they're getting pulled in different directions by their constituencies, by the parties, by the different stakeholder groups, lobbyists. They're dealing with all of that every day. Um, a few things. So one I would say is like I've heard that folks typically go in with a singular goal, right? So on tribal sovereignty, I'm going to get this one thing done. I'm going to be responsive to my groups and, do these other things and show up for these votes that my party is expecting me to be on. But I'm going to use some of my horse trading, for lack of a better word, to be able to get to this one thing that I'm going to accomplish. And we saw this with Native women in state legislatures between 2019 and 2023. We saw a lot of them put forward missing, murdered Indigenous people legislation and get it passed. And so get resources, got, their state law enforcement boards to prioritize it, more data collection, more tribal representation in those law enforcement mechanisms. And so to that, I would also say networks, right? And it's one of the things I think that Advance is doing that's so important is that um, these legislators need each other because again, there's so few, right? You may be the only one in your state or one of like two or three. Um, and so what Advance is really building is the Native Caucus, right? For state of legislators and electeds across the country. There are some like other efforts like at National Council of State Legislatures, but that's kind of waned a bit. I think they've had some staffing shortages, so those state legislators don't get the same support in that way anymore. And so Advance has really been filling this void, I think, of bringing people together and also having them share their policy priorities and how can you get that sovereignty piece done while keeping your seat, right? Keeping your seat for all the other constituencies that you serve. And so I think, it depends on the district again, how they have to maneuver that. But they've been able to do it and it's been really incredible to watch.
Thank you. And if you are interested in running for office or attending our training program, one thing that you get access to after graduation is a network of other alumni who have been through that same program or who have also been in office or are currently in office who you are able to access that wealth of knowledge from. Um, Elise, can you talk a little bit more about some systemic barriers that continue to limit Native representation? In your opinion, how can we work to dismantle them?
Yeah, there's a few, and I think folks on the call will be unsurprised by what I'm going to say. There's a really good reason that organizations like Native American Rights Fund, NARF, and others have been so focused on voting rights and challenging voting laws in states where folks who live on reservation or specifically in rural areas are going to be disadvantaged at the ballot box. And this, of course, has been an ongoing struggle from American founding through the Snyder Act, where we pseudo got citizenship in 1924 to now, how Native people are seen as citizens or not. So that's been, I think, a really big challenge, and it's been encouraging to see so much alignment with other civil rights groups around voting rights protection work. But there is a specific set of barriers that Native folks are experiencing. And of course, if we can't get Native folks to the ballot box, it inhibits our ability also to have Native folks feel like they can run for office, right? If I can't even help my folks get out to vote in my community, how can I expect to win an election, right? So these things are intricately tied. Um, and then there's lack of enforcement. There may be a number of mechanisms in place at different levels for tribal engagement or that should be happening that just aren't. They're not prioritized for whatever reason. And one example I love to share is about Representative Christina Haswood. She's a legislator in Kansas. She's Dene. And she does something very simple but very powerful. Whenever she is sitting on a committee in the state legislature, and an agency head comes before her, or somebody putting forward legislation, she will often ask, "Did you consult tribes on this?" Right? Whatever it is, did you consult tribes? And it's a polite reminder that if they didn't, they're not following their own policies. And we need more folks in these positions pushing that issue. You're going to respect tribal sovereignty and consult us, or you're not doing your job. And so even one person asking that question can make the difference of whether or not a tribe gets consulted. It's a lot of power. And I would say, going off that example, there's also a systemic issue that's around lack of awareness and education for the average American who's not Native on who Native people are, what tribal sovereignty is, why it matters, how it fits in with American federalism. I don't think the average American knows about American federalism, let alone about tribal sovereignty. So in some cases, it's also just blatant racism. It's discrimination. We've read many accounts of Native folks running for office and experiences, racist remarks saying, you have to pick a side, you have to pick whether you're Native or American, right? As though those things are not one and the same. And even folks from within their own party structure, sometimes. And so that is a huge area where, folks are gonna get a lot of pushback at times, and that can be really hard to overcome and move forward, but they do. And to be frank, in this current backlash era to DEI and racial and ethnic equity, it's a really dangerous time to try and push some of that agenda. So we see that advocates are carefully approaching their work on tribal sovereignty to ensure it's not going to fall into the bucket of racial equity issues, which would make them more polarizing. I think there probably also needs to be more research on the pipeline of folks who tend to run for office in the US system. This is something I think we can do now. We couldn't have done this 5 years ago because we just didn't have the data. But now, between Advance and Indian Country Today, ICT, Sorry News, we have a great, network of electeds that we can ask, right? So anecdotally, we see that often folks have already served on tribal councils or maybe as tribal agency staff, on their tribal court or an executive capacity. And so they're coming from an elected office within the tribe, and then they're seeing that, there's a set of issues or something that's motivating me that I can't do because of the jurisdictional power of the tribe or the bounds of, their tribal government. I have to go run in this system to be able to address it, right? That could be taxation, it could be, clean water, roads, whatever it might be. And I think more insight we could get here could help us identify and generate support the next cohort of folks who run and win seats.
Thank you. Although these barriers exist and we know that they are present in all of these systems that we exist in, we know that there are Native people who are succeeding in these roles and actually making change as well. Can you share a couple real-world examples from the report where Indigenous representation translated into better outcomes for tribal communities and you were able to actually see it?
Yeah, there are so many, I'm very happy to say. I think we see that especially with Assemblyman James Ramos. He's was a former chairman of of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians in California. He became the first Native person elected to the California State Assembly in 2018. And just a handful of things that he was able to do. I'm sure this is not all of it, but some things that we highlighted in the report. So he got the UC schools to generate an accountability system for the return of artifacts and human remains in accordance with NAGPRA. He worked to give tribal governments and tribal courts access to the California law enforcement telecommunication system, so that they could share data around the missing murdered Indigenous people epidemic. Um, he also required the state officials receive training on tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction, which is huge. I wish every state had a set of staff and officials had to go through something like that. And then he also introduced legislation that would require the local education agencies to identify achievement gaps for Native students, and figure out how to address that. So he did a lot at the state level, and continues to. He's still in office. Um, I'll talk about Ben Nighthorse Campbell. He's legendary. People know his career. And of the bills that he sponsored, many became laws, including the ones that established historical sites using a Native perspective for the interpretation. So that was the site for Battle of Little Bighorn and as well as the Sand Creek Massacre. And he also encouraged the settlement of tribal claims in a water rights settlement for the Ute in Colorado. When he was chairman of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, they passed more legislation than any other time period in congressional history. In 2000, and for a long time, he was the only Native person in office. So he served a good while on his own. In 2000, Campbell passed multiple bills related to tribal tourism, courts, economic development, and enforcing the Indian Arts and Crafts Enforcement Act, which, of course, as we know, with the age of AI, has been incredibly hard to enforce. And offshore, product creation, it's been really difficult. That market is flooded with stuff that steals designs from Native people. So he really set up the initial framework for holding folks accountable on that. And then I'll share a judicial example. So Judge Diane Humatewa, who is Hopi, she's a federal appointee. She has done a lot of work to support the next generation of Native lawyers and judges. She's done a lot of mentorship and helping get more Native folks into the legal field and potentially on the pathway to judgeship. But in addition to that, she had issued a temporary block on exploratory lithium drilling on land that had some cultural significance to the Hualapai tribe. And there's a bunch of other examples too. You can find this type of advocacy for Native people by Native electeds and appointeds throughout the report and at every single level of government. So it's truly incredible to see what they've been able to accomplish, and not just for their own tribes, but we continue to see that these are efforts that folks are putting forward to benefit all tribes in their district or all tribes nationally. And it's great to see, people are taking that responsibility seriously.
Our last question, well, our last policy-centered question. So can you speak a little bit more about what role data research and policy analysis play in advancing Native political power? We highlight a lot of our leadership training programs, but can you speak a little bit more into the data and research part of the work that we do at Advance?
I would be happy to. So we simply put, we have to know where we stand to make advances. How can we see how far we've come or what we've accomplished if we don't have a benchmark? And so with the data we have now, as imperfect as it may be, we at least have a way to track progress and see where we're making strides versus where we need to put more energy and resources. Depending on what we see over the next, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we could start to see some patterns and say, you know what, we really need to put more resources into, elected, what is it? Electric cooperative boards, right? The grid has never been more salient right now. It's amazing that we are starting to have Native folks on these important specialty boards at the local level, because with the advent of data centers and energy usage, that's going to be a huge issue moving forward. And folks really want to put those on tribal land. And so there is some conflict there. There is some policy work that has to be done, and we want to do it through a culturally appropriate lens with Native legislators leading the way, or appointments on that board. It also allows us to create durable networks. So going back to knowing who's running, who's elected, how can we connect political leaders to share strategy, policy ideas, and honestly just have somebody to understand what they're going through. I think that For folks who've gone through the training or know about our training, a lot of this is just connecting on a human level and saying, yeah, it can be hard. Here's how I got through that. And here's why it's important to keep going and what I've been able to do, despite the haters, right? Like this is how I move forward anyway. Um, I would say the message testing and polling projects we conduct are helping us to better understand Native policy priorities and where we should put energy, and what our electeds need to know about what different Native communities need to see from them for accountability purposes. So it's pretty incredible. Like, where else are you seeing polling projects specifically focused on Native communities? We don't get that from the mainstream media. We get lumped into the other category, and then we get kind of like a terrible apology about it. But none of the prominent party-based pollsters are even thinking about separating us out in samples. They typically don't sample us enough to do so in a statistically significant manner or representative manner. Um, but we've also demonstrated that Native folks can be a powerful voting bloc when engaged in a respectful way that prioritizes tribal sovereignty. So I think that the field of Native political behavior is an area of study. It's pretty young. We're talking like less than 30 years old as an area of study, right? So we have a long way to go in filling the gaps, and the research in advance and projects like these that center on Indigenous knowledge are so crucial to that endeavor.
Well, I just want to give you a huge thank you for all the work that you have put into this report. I know that our team has been looking forward to it for a while, and it's great to see it finally come to fruition. I encourage everyone listening to download our report. You can find it at our website, as well as more information about the Native Leadership Institute and other trainings that we have going on. Um, Another shout out, I wanted to give a shout out to Megan Feeney, our data and research manager, for the work that she also put into this. And another shout out to our partner, ICT, for all the representation work that they've also done. We truly could not have done any of it without you. Just a quick lightning round to finish us off. Some personal questions. If you had a whole free day with no emails, no schedule, or no meetings scheduled, clear calendar, what would you do with it?
So there's what I'd want to do, and then there's what I'd actually do. What I'd actually do is sleep. But what I would hope that I would do with my day is go be on the water or garden. And I garden in my front and backyard. So those are two things that really bring me back to myself. And right now, right now I'm loving a pool day just to read if I can do that. And I would say like I garden in the evenings because it's just so dang hot. So those are the things I would just want to do all day and not be on a computer and staring at screens.
You can also sleep by the water, so you can kill two birds, one stone.
That's so smart, Lexi. You're so right.
Last question. Do you have a favorite summer tradition or ritual that you try to do each year? Have you done it if you do?
Yeah, so our ceremonies for Osage, we call them in Lanchka, which translates to the dance of the first sun. Those are always in June, and my district's the end of June. So, this year I went out there with my husband and my brother and his fiance. And met our family out there, and it's always a really good time. So I love doing that. Um, and then I think just I do a lot of writing and traveling during the summer, and I think as I prepare for fall semester, as a faculty member, I just spend a lot of time thinking about how I can support this next generation because I'm teaching Native politics and a lot of my students are non-Native. And so I have this opportunity and this responsibility to guide them in a respectful way and get them exposed to a lot of different Native voices and scholars. So, it makes me nervous because I want to do a good job, but it's also really exciting and it's a fun opportunity. So that's what I've been spending a lot of my time doing.
I'm sure you are a great faculty member. I would love to take a class under you. Every time I listen to one of your presentations, I get it. I actually understand it. So that's always a win.
That's huge. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Elise, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really enjoyed this conversation and hope everyone has got a little bit more information into our latest report. And again, please go download it, read it fully, and witness the work that has went into this data and the research that it's taken to get this fully out for everyone. Um, Want to plug again our Native Leadership Institute training, please go to our website. You're able to see any of our upcoming classes as well as our application link. If you have a Native leader that you would like to nominate for the training, please reach out to us through our email. We're always looking for submissions. And we hope everyone has a great night and keep showing up for your community.
Thank you.